The sunshine and beaches of South Florida attract many types of people. Aspiring young models gravitate here with the hopes of being discovered. Beginning in February 1984, the dreams of stardom darkened into nightmares when several young women disappeared. It was the beginning of a string of brutal and terrifying murders that spread out across the country.
It's a model's job to rivet the public's attention. But in 1984, some aspiring models began attracting publicity in a terrible new way. Across the country, dreams of glamour turned nightmarish as young women disappeared, only to be found tortured and killed. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When a suspect emerged, the FBI's 10 most wanted list became the tool we used to try to flush him out.
The promising life of Beth Kenyon came to a violent end on March 5th, 1984. The attractive 23-year-old dreamed of becoming a model. She had even been a finalist in the Miss Florida pageant. But all her hopes were cut short this Monday afternoon. The next day, Beth's parents reported her disappearance to the Miami police. The police merely listed Beth as a missing person and explained many girls her age drop out of sight for various reasons without telling their parents. But the Kenyons knew their daughter wasn't the type to just vanish after a few days on a lark. They hired private detective Ken Whitaker and his son Ken Jr. to investigate.
She's been missing.
The Kenyons told the Whitakers that Beth worked as a teacher of emotionally disturbed children.
She has a regular routine that she comes home.
She was responsible and enjoyed a close relationship with her family.
Strange there. This is, as you can see, where she had a 6 o'clock appointment. That she
Fearing
did not
something
show
had
up.
happened to Beth, the Kenyons had searched their daughter's apartment in North Dade County for anything that might help them find her. But all they found was an address book and a picture album.
Beth, and this is Beth over here, and this is a boyfriend, somebody she went out with.
This is just showing me a picture.
Armed with little more than a few snapshots of Beth and her friends, the investigators went to work. The father and son team quickly narrowed down Beth Kenyon's last known whereabouts. Ken Whitaker Jr. talked to an attendant at a Miami gas station near the school where Beth taught. Ken showed the attendant several photographs. He clearly remembered Beth, but he also recognized someone else in the photos, a man that accompanied Beth the afternoon she disappeared. His name was Christopher Wilder. On March 11th, 6 days after Beth's disappearance, the investigators contacted Wilder by phone. He denied knowing where Beth was, but invited the Whitakers to his house to speak more about her. But when Wilder didn't answer his door, the suspicious investigators decided to look around. They had learned he was a successful building contractor and a self-proclaimed fashion photographer. The Kenyons had told the father and son team that Wilder had proposed to their daughter, but that she had turned him down, leaving him upset and angry. Rifling through the garbage, the Whitakers found a photograph. On the surface, it appeared an innocent picture, but to trained eyes, it meant more. The Investigators soon learned that Christopher Wilder had driven a car in the Miami Grand Prix. On February 26, 1984, he finished 17th and won $400. That race day was also the last time that anyone saw Rosario Gonzalez. The 20-year-old worked for a marketing firm distributing free aspirin samples at the Grand Prix. The Miami news still buzzed with the mysterious disappearance of Gonzalez. She had vanished just 5 days before Beth Kenyon. The investigators discovered that Wilder knew Gonzalez. She had modeled for him in amateur photo shoots. It was a critical connection. The two missing women, Beth Kenyon and Rosario Gonzalez, were linked through Christopher Wilder. With this information, Mr. and Mrs. Kenyon sought the help of the FBI. Special Agent John Hanlon of the FBI's Violent Crimes Unit in Miami remembers the meeting.
On the 12th of March, the Kenyons came to the FBI seeking more active involvement of the FBI. Of course, we didn't have any jurisdiction at the time. There was no evidence of an abduction.
In an attempt to put pressure on Wilder, the Kenyons' private investigators leaked their findings to the Miami Herald. The story was published on March 16, 1984. Though the article did not mention Christopher Wilder's name, it clearly accused him. The report described the man connecting Gonzalez and Kenyon as a local contractor, race car driver, amateur photographer, and a native Australian. It was Wilder to a T. Although the FBI had no jurisdiction, Supervisory Special Agent Gordon McNeil had already begun looking into the matter.
This connection drew my interest, and I decided to open a preliminary kidnapping investigation to see if we had a possible violation of federal law.
Agents McNeil and Hanlon found Wilder was a likely suspect. He had a criminal history that reached back to his native Australia, where he was out on bail on a sexual assault charge. Days later, on March 21st, the agents were notified about an incident which allowed them to open a full investigation. A phone call came into the Miami FBI office, reporting that a Tallahassee, Florida woman had been abducted and transported across state lines into Georgia, where she escaped. The initial description of her assailant fit Christopher Wilder.
Are you okay?
Special Agent Hanlon flew to Georgia to hear the victim's story. It was a nightmare.
Oh, sorry, no business.
19-year-old Linda Grober told Hanlon she'd been shopping in a mall in Tallahassee, Florida, when a man approached her about a modeling job.
Magazine covers. I got any number of them. They make it really sound like
Claiming to be a photographer, the stranger invited her back to his car to see his portfolio. It was the middle of the afternoon in a very public place, and Linda said she felt perfectly safe.
Never? Yeah. A pretty face like this.
When he asked her if she'd ever modeled, she said no. He flattered her with remarks about how beautiful she was and promised he could put her on the cover of Vogue. But Linda reported that when they got to his car, the photographer began changing his story. He claimed he'd left his portfolio at his studio, and he asked Linda to go back to the studio with him. When she hesitated, the man attacked and pushed her into the car. He clubbed her on the back of her head. Everything just went black. When she regained consciousness, they were driving on a country road. When her abductors saw her coming around, he stopped the car at a secluded spot. He dragged Linda from the car, telling her that if she tried to escape, he would kill her. He wrapped his fingers around her throat and strangled her until she passed out. The next time she woke up, she was wrapped in a sleeping bag, lying on a bed in a cheap motel room. Once again, he threatened to kill her if she tried to escape.
Don't move.
He tied her to the bed and superglued her eyes shut. For the next several hours, the kidnapper repeatedly raped, beat, and tortured Linda Grober. When she disobeyed his commands, he shocked her with an extension cord he had fashioned into an electrocution device. The abuse was so severe, Linda realized she would be dead before someone found her. She managed to break free and locked herself in the bathroom.
Somebody help! Help!
She pounded on the walls and screamed for help.
Help me!
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Hey! Stop now! Stop it! Stop it! I'm telling you.
The rapist panicked, grabbed what he could, and ran. Agent Hanlon showed Grober a series of photos and asked if she could identify her assailant.
It was absolutely no doubt in my mind. I mean, I'd spent hours with this person that's who he was. And I just identified him as clearly Christopher Wilder.
Now 35, a PhD candidate and a single mom, Linda Grober's fierce determination saved her life. It also made her a strong witness, ready to risk everything for her abuser's arrest.
I was in the hospital for a week or something like that, and then I had to basically leave the country while he was still a fugitive because they were concerned about my safety. They were concerned about my family's safety.
As heinous as Grober's ordeal was, it had the value of catapulting the investigation into a federal case. Because she had been abducted across a state line, the FBI now had full jurisdiction. Christopher Wilder was now wanted for the kidnapping and rape of Linda Grober. And he remained the prime suspect in the disappearance of Rosario Gonzalez and Beth Kenyon.
Obviously now we had federal violation, and we had every reason to put all the resources of the FBI into this case.
Not knowing exactly where to find Wilder, a team of agents descended upon his house in full force. Kicking in the door, they poured in, ready to arrest the suspect.
Clear! 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 Clear!
But they found an empty house.
Clear! Everything clear?
All clear, all clear.
Wilder had long abandoned it.
All clear.
He was on the run, days ahead of the federal agents. And every minute he remained free put another woman in jeopardy. The desperate chase had begun. March 1984. FBI agents conducted a meticulous search of the abandoned home belonging to Christopher Wilder. 2 women were missing and presumed dead at his hands. A third had barely escaped with her life after her kidnapping and rape. The agents needed something to clue them in to their suspect's present whereabouts.
You like to decorate it, huh? What happened to his maid?
But before he left, Wilder had prepared his home for any investigator.
The place had been manicured. There were basically no fingerprints left in Wilder's house. You're always going to find fingerprints inside a residence. It looked like everything had been totally cleaned.
FBI and local authorities canvassed Miami and West Palm Beach. But no one reported having seen or heard from Wilder since he left Linda Grober in a Georgia motel. The FBI alerted police to keep an eye out for Wilder's car. They asked banks and credit card companies to monitor any transactions he might make. But informational systems in 1984 moved slowly. The leads trickled in and were usually too late for a quick response. On March 21st, 1984, a sharp-eyed utility repairman in Central Florida noticed something unusual in a shallow creek. It was the barely recognizable body of a young woman. She was later identified as 21-year-old Teresa Ferguson. Witnesses last saw her 3 days earlier, leaving a shopping mall with a man fitting Wilder's description. The autopsy showed she'd been beaten with a tire iron and strangled to death. The victim's profile and the savagery of the crime suggested Wilder. But nothing directly tied him to it. If it was the Australian contractor, the FBI agents knew they had a serial killer on the loose. One that had to be stopped before he murdered again. Agents continued to follow the suspect's trail. An automatic security camera photographed Wilder at a bank in Tampa. The bank records showed that he had emptied his accounts of more than $19,000. It was an ominous break. Their prey now had the money to travel far and wide. By March 22, 1984, Wilder was already in Texas. Witnesses saw him approach 23-year-old Terry Walden in the parking lot of Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. Walden was a wife, mother of two, and a nursing student.
Yes, I'm a photographer. My job is to make...
Wilder asked her if she'd like to do some modeling.
Make a lot of extra money. You sure you don't want to keep the card and think about it?
But Wilder couldn't seduce Walden with his pitch.
Okay.
She politely declined. She had no way of knowing that she would soon see him again. While the FBI began its national hunt, witnesses later told investigators that Wilder had stayed in Beaumont, Texas another day. This time he went back to familiar territory to stalk his next victim.
They have this one's $7.99 or $9.99.
He visited the local mall, shopping for a young woman to deceive with dreams of glamour.
You're taking some fashion photography? No, listen. You don't have to blind me. I'm legit. It's okay.
But no one succumbed to his bogus promises.
No, sorry.
That's fine. That's fine.
After getting brushed off several times, he spotted a familiar face. It was Terry Walden.
Hey, hi.
She had come to
I
run
saw you
errands after
yesterday.
dropping her 4-year-old daughter off at daycare.
Are you interested now? Will you take the card and just consider?
Terry again turned Wilder
No.
down.
I'm sure you could.
But this time, he wouldn't take no for an answer. As she left the mall, Wilder followed her out to her car. In broad daylight, in the middle of a crowded mall parking lot, Wilder attacked Walden. He knocked her unconscious and pushed her into her Mercury Cougar. He grabbed his bags and drove off in the victim's car. Walden's husband reported her missing later that afternoon when she failed to pick up her daughter at daycare. But by then, it was too late. Terry Walden's body was found floating in a canal near Beaumont, Texas, a few days later. The police recovered Wilder's Chrysler a few miles away.
Some fiber and some here and here. Let's get a couple pictures of this, Jim, before we take the stuff out.
An FBI forensic search of the car uncovered hair and fibers matching Teresa Ferguson, the young woman discovered by the repairman 5 days before. It confirmed what the agents had suspected all along. Teresa Ferguson had been Wilder's fourth known victim.
Get on the floor, bro.
McNeil and Hanlon estimated that the killer was still at least 2 days ahead of them. Out of the Miami office, they broadcast a national all-points bulletin for Terry Walden's stolen car.
Every state police agency along the way, every state trooper who was out on that highway knew the car we were looking for. And unfortunately, it's amazing sometimes you say, okay, well, he's in a purple car. We say, how many purple cars are out there? Well, it's amazing how many purple cars are out there when you're looking for purple cars. And that was the problem. We never knew at the time what license plate he was using on that particular vehicle.
FBI teletypes clattered endlessly. Every field office in the country received page after page describing Wilder's physical appearance, his victim profiles, where he had last been identified, and where he was thought to be heading. The technology of 1984, however, could not keep up with the pace of his flight.
There were so many leads on Wilder going back and forth all over the country. Every one of them went to all FBI offices for information, that the FBI teletype system was backed up over 48 hours for about 2 weeks because of the volume of information that was flowing back and forth on Wilder.
That left the Bureau with only one certain way to track Wilder. They had to follow the grisly trail of corpses he discarded as he ran. The next victim was 21-year-old Suzanne Logan. She was last seen shopping at a mall near Oklahoma City. A fisherman stumbled upon her body 2 days after she disappeared. The location of her disappearance and the manner in which she died all suggested one thing. She had died at the hands of Christopher Wilder.
In this particular case, we had an individual who was kidnapping, raping, torturing, and murdering a woman about every day and a half. So there was intense pressure, as there should be.
Slow technology and a fast fugitive hampered the FBI. But on March 28th, they got the break they had hoped for. Wilder checked into a motel in Rifle, Colorado, using a stolen Visa card. The FBI knew he had the card and was using it, but they had not been able to trace it until Rifle.
In those days, 1984, they didn't have the instant validation of your credit card when you walk into a hotel. They only called in bills that were going to exceed $100. Every motel that Wilder stayed along his murderous route, the charges were in the vicinity of $50 to $60.
Perhaps from sheer boredom, the motel clerk decided to call in the credit card that night, instead of waiting to mail it the next day. Instead of approval, the clerk received a phone number to call immediately. An early morning call mobilized the FBI's Denver, Colorado field office. At last, the FBI knew where the fugitive was. In the early hours of the morning of March 29th, 4 agents approached Wilder's motel room, confident that they had finally cornered the killer.
Okay. FBI! Search warrant! Go! FBI!
He wasn't there. As swiftly as the FBI had responded, Wilder had eluded them. For some unknown reason, the fugitive had departed before sunrise.
He's not in the hotel.
It had been the best lead the agency had, and it failed. Once again, the exasperated task force had no idea of where the predator was. Yet they feared it was one of the dozens of shopping malls within a day's drive of Rifle, Colorado. March 29th, 1984. In just 3 weeks, the Australian contractor Christopher Wilder had abducted 4 women and murdered 3 of them. FBI agents noticed a pattern developing in the campaign of violence. The killer kept his direction westward, and he had narrowed his hunting grounds to shopping malls. "18-year-old Cheryl Bonaventura was last seen at the Mesa Shopping Mall in Grand Junction, Colorado. The FBI would later connect Wilder to her death.
You had a man that you knew was on the prowl. You had a man who you knew as each day goes by that some poor soul in deathly fear of her life was dying in an extremely extremely painful way.
To get the word out, the FBI cast a wide net. Across the country, agents notified security officers and mall managers about the danger, telling them to be on the lookout for the Australian. Investigators supplied malls with photos and flyers that were posted to alert shoppers. Despite the FBI warnings, a teen magazine held a cover girl competition at the Meadows Mall in Las Vegas. Wilder showed up, armed with his camera. He chatted with several of the teens during the event, but eventually zeroed in on Michelle Korfman. The 17-year-old had driven up the 25 miles from her family's Boulder City, Nevada home. Nervous about participating in her first model search, she had asked her friends and family to let her go alone. After a few minutes' conversation with Wilder, Korfman changed her clothes and left the mall with him.
Yeah, sure, I do.
That's great.
It was April 1st. As soon as Vegas authorities alerted the FBI that a local girl had disappeared at a mall, agents responded. They asked for all pictures that anyone had taken of the fashion show. One photographer immediately delivered 5 rolls of film.
And when they printed those photographs, there was the Korfman girl on stage in a modeling type pose, and who's directly beyond her, about 20 feet away, looking at her with what I call the look of a homicidal maniac, none other than Christopher Wilder.
Like the others, young Michelle Korfman suffered at the hands of Wilder. He bound and gagged her with duct tape. Then he beat, raped, and tortured her.
and you will see incisions in the body. They may only be 1 inch to 1.5 inches long, and they're not deep. They're done just enough to make it bleed. They were only meant to torture, not to kill, until he finally actually killed the victims. He was a brutal sexual sadist.
Prowling shopping centers and other areas.
On April 5th, 4 days after the Michelle Korfman disappearance, the FBI held a press conference. They announced the placement of Christopher Wilder on its famed 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list.
10 most wanted.
For 50 years, the list has helped generate the publicity needed to catch violent fugitives.
Hey, Val.
Special Agent Tron Brecky serves as national spokesman for the FBI.
Okay, thank you.
The criteria for the top 10 was met with Wilder. He was a menace to society. He was extremely dangerous, a violent individual on whom charges were outstanding, and he had fled the area where we thought that he might be. Therefore, it was very important for us to get the message out to the American public and to the media that he could be anywhere in the United States.
But Wilder's addition to the 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list came a day too late for Tina Marie Risico. In Lomita, California, on the day before the press conference, the 16-year-old visited the Del Amo Fashion Center mall to apply for a summer job.
What a beautiful face she had.
The high school student wanted the work to save for a car. She met Christopher Wilder when he said that she was perfect for a modeling gig he had to shoot.
And actually, you're so perfect that I could give you $100 right here.
He gave her $100 cash and promised much more to come.
If you're right, and I know you are, I can tell you are. Do you have a few minutes to just go out and look at clothes and shop? Take some pictures in front of you. I say to myself, this girl is perfect.
Wilder drove Tina Marie to a nearby park. At first, everything progressed as if it were a legitimate job. He said the scenic location had perfect light for the camera.
This canopy right here, I think, is really lovely. Right?
As the shoot began, an eager Tina Marie worked to please her photographer.
Yeah, just look sort of.
When Wilder told her to
Let me change
smile,
lanes
she did.
real quick.
When he
Try
told her
looking
to
up that
tilt her
way.
head, she did. And then it all turned wrong.
Now, in the car. All right?
He pointed a .357 Magnum at her face and told her to get in the car.
Quickly, quickly.
The terrified teen had no choice but to obey. Wilder brought Tina Marie Risico to a motel in San Diego. There, like all the others, he beat his teenage victim, tied her to the bed, and raped her repeatedly. Wilder cut her with his knife and electrocuted her using wires he would tie to different parts of her body. The brutality perplexed Agent Hanlon.
You say to yourself, why would anybody want to do that to anybody? To scare them so bad, to brutalize them so bad, to torture them with an electrical cord, and then kill them like a piece of trash. And that person knows they're going to be killed. I mean, up until some point, the great realization comes over that individual, I'm not going to survive this. My life's over. And these are young women.
He identifies himself as a professional photographer, commenting on a young woman's appearance and attempts to persuade her to accompany him from the area.
Just as Tina's life was about to end, a special news bulletin captured Wilder's attention.
Dangerous, and this approach may lead to his apprehension. Christopher Bernard Wilder has been placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
It was the FBI press conference. Wilder watched in horror as his picture was plastered on television sets across the nation. The federal agents proclaimed him the most wanted fugitive in America. They held him responsible for the disappearances of 6 young women. They didn't know about the 7th victim in the hotel room with him.
We gotta move, come on.
Wilder panicked. He grabbed Tina Marie and hit the road.
Come on, we gotta move.
But now that he was top on the 10 most wanted fugitives list, Wilder landed on the front page of every newspaper and on the top of every newscast in the country.
It's the front page headline in every newspaper in America. Every news show, every radio show is talking about Christopher Wilder and showing his picture and saying his name, Christopher Wilder.
The FBI hoped that by plastering Wilder's face across TV screens and newspapers, someone, somewhere, would spot him. It was the best chance agents had to stop Wilder before he destroyed another life. In the spring of 1984, the FBI conducted the largest manhunt in history for the rapist and murderer, Christopher Wilder. They knew of at least 6 victims. They suspected there were many more. Wilder had squeezed through the FBI net in Nevada as he headed back east. With him was a 16-year-old hostage named Tina Marie Rosico. On April 10, 1984, outside a shopping mall in Gary, Indiana, Christopher Wilder told Rosico that he would let her go on one condition. She had to help him catch his next victim. For 6 days, the adolescent had been raped, beaten, and terrorized. She was ready to do whatever he asked. Wilder noticed Dawnette Wilt ducking into several shops. He figured she was job hunting in the mall. Rosico told Dawnette that Wilder was a store manager and wanted her to fill out a job application at his car. When they reached his car, Wilder drew his pistol and forced Dawnette to get in.
Sweetheart, why don't you just come with us? Get the car. Get in. Go around.
He sped off with the 2 girls. Witnesses saw them leave.
A young woman, very attractive, as were all of Wilder's victims, had been taken from was seen leaving with an individual who they believed to be Christopher Wilder from a mall in the Indianapolis area. And so when that information came to us, we felt that, okay, now we know he's headed back east.
The Bureau directed every agent east of the Mississippi to work on the case. Despite his promise, Wilder refused to release Tina Marie. Instead, he forced Rosico to watch while he tortured and raped Dawnette in front of her. The nightmare continued for 2 days. On the morning of April 12, 1984, Tina Marie heard a familiar voice on the morning news.
Any kind of energy, and just put Tina come home alive safely. You know, we're all rooting for you.
The word that we've got
on national television, Tina Marie's mother begged the kidnapper not to hurt her daughter.
Your daughter, and that there is every indication that your daughter is still alive. And
Wilder flew into another panic. He packed up his hostages and
dressed.
left.
Get her dressed and you get dressed. Now.
Wilder complained that it was only a matter of time before the FBI caught up with him. He stopped the car in a wooded area near Penn Yan, New York. He ordered Rosico not to move. Dawnette was drugged with sleeping pills, yet he forced her to march into the forest. Left alone, Tina Marie pondered the opportunity to escape. But the horror of the last 9 days had broken her mentally. She stayed put. Walking through the woods, Dawnette Wilt slowly woke up to the realization that Wilder was going to kill her. She didn't want to die by stabbing. She begged him to shoot her instead. Ignoring her pleas, Wilder stabbed her through the chest twice and left her for dead.
Okay, here we go.
As he began to drive away, the fear that Dawnette Wilt might still be alive seized him. He returned to the scene to properly dispose of Dawnette.
You stay here. You stay here, you hear?
When he got there, he could scarcely believe what he saw. She was gone. Incredibly, Dawnette Wilt had survived. Stabbed twice, bleeding profusely, drugged and beaten, she had managed to pull herself up and escape to a road where a passing motorist rescued her. Thanks to Wilt's testimony, the FBI now pinned Wilder in the Northeast, still driving the Mercury Cougar he had stolen from Terry Walden. But for how long?
After he went back and found out that she was no longer there, he realized obviously that he had to do something with this vehicle. He needed a new vehicle. And he got into western New York State.
Once again, he headed for the nearest mall. This time in Victor, New York, where he spotted a gold Pontiac Firebird. He told Rosico she would take the wheel of the Cougar and follow him wherever he went. He carjacked 33-year-old Beth Dodge. At gunpoint, Wilder forced her into the back seat of her Firebird. The emotionally shattered Tina Marie did as she was ordered. Wilder drove for a half an hour to a secluded area.
Come on, get out. Come on, just get out. Just get out. Just get out. Listen, I want you to get the white suitcase, and I want you to get the camera, and I want you to put it in this car and wait for me, you understand?
He forced Beth Dodge into the woods. Moments later, Tina Marie heard 2 shots echo out from the trees. There had been no rape, no torture this time. Wilder had simply killed Dodge for her car. But he had a different fate in mind for Tina Marie. In all the hell he had put her through, Wilder had bonded with Tina Marie. He told her he didn't want her to be around when the end came. He drove Tina Marie Rosico to the airport in Boston and gave her money for a ticket home to Los Angeles. Her ordeal was finally over. Once safely home, Tina Marie would fill in details for agents about Wilder's murderous rampage. Wilder was now alone, and the agents didn't want to wait till another victim disappeared to clue them into his whereabouts.
During the search for Wilder, we knew that he had friends in Canada and had visited Canada extensively. So we felt there was a good chance that he was heading directly to the east and then north into Canada.
Wilder raced toward the border in Beth Dodge's Firebird. For 3 weeks, he had beaten the FBI's best efforts. Even the 10 most wanted fugitives list had failed to produce his capture. Agents McNeil and Hanman desperately wanted to stop the killer before he struck again or fled their jurisdiction. By April 1984, Christopher Wilder had left 7 women dead across America. 3 more were presumed dead. 3 others had survived with rapes and beatings. The FBI believed that he was in New England, heading north. Federal agents concentrated their resources in the northeastern states before he could escape across the Canadian border.
I mean, the FBI had agents out circularizing in the wanted poster out and that kind of thing, but the best thing you have going for you are the hundreds of police officers up in that area who are many more eyes and ears than FBI agents available in New England.
On Friday, April 13th, 1984, Wilder stopped for gas in the tiny town of Colebrook, New Hampshire, about a dozen miles from the Canadian border. While he filled the tank, he casually asked an attendant about the paperwork that might be needed to cross the border. 2 state troopers, Wayne Fortier and Leo Jellison, spotted Beth Dodge's car. They, like almost every police department in the country, had been told to be on the lookout for the Firebird and for a man of Wilder's description. Jellison asked Wilder if he could speak with him. Wilder leaped into the Firebird and grabbed his .357 Magnum. In the struggle, the weapon went off. Officer Jellison was shot in the chest. He would live. But Christopher Wilder would not. The bullet that wounded Officer Jellison first passed through Wilder. It pierced his heart, killing him instantly. Wilder's cross-country reign of terror ended with a 10th death. His own. Authorities ultimately recovered the mutilated bodies of Cheryl Bonaventura and Michelle Korfman in the months afterwards. But the 2 missing women that started the investigation, Rosario Gonzalez and Beth Kenyon, were never found. Mr. and Mrs. Kenyon went to their graves without knowing the fate of their daughter. Other victims and their loved ones have struggled to restore their shattered lives. Linda Grober has also learned a chilling lesson.
I think an important point to make is that these people are not always demons, and they don't always have tattoos, they don't always have long hair. They're often extremely eloquent, and they're disguised, and they can fit easily into your father's living room after dinner sipping a wine or a brandy.
The terrifying truth is that Christopher Wilder was not unique. He made the most wanted fugitives list, but there are dozens of killers like him each year that never reach national attention. They trawl our shopping centers, our schools, and our churches, searching for victims. Vivid dreams of easy fame and fortune can quickly darken. Only through public awareness, tireless vigilance, and the resourcefulness of the FBI can we hope to keep these predators at bay. The nation's long web of interstates provided the perfect hunting ground for a depraved predator. He preyed on hitchhikers wandering the roads. He held them captive, then tortured and raped them. When that didn't satisfy his warped cravings, he killed instead.
Across the nation, a serial rapist targeted unsuspecting women. It was only a matter of time till his dark urges raged out of control and led him to murder. He followed a path so random, it was impossible to trace, and all that tied him to his crimes were his access to the highways and a bizarre sexual fetish. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When investigators believed the suspect had committed dozens of murders, the FBI was determined to put the brakes on his nationwide rampage.
February 5th, 1990. On a road in Houston, Texas, 18-year-old Nicole Tuttle desperately tried to flag down passing motorists. Someone finally stopped for the bruised and bleeding woman.
Oh my God. There's a guy trying to kill me.
The driver took her to the closest phone to call police.
Please help.
At the Houston police station, Nicole told officers that she'd been kidnapped and assaulted, but she'd managed to escape. Her ordeal began in California 1 week earlier. On January 29th, she hitched a ride from a trucker at a rest stop. He said his name was Dusty and that he was headed east through Arizona. After a few hours on the road, she fell asleep in the back compartment of his truck. It seemed that was exactly what he was waiting for. He climbed in back and overpowered her. Before she was fully awake, he chained her to the walls and gagged her with a horse bit. The trucker whipped her and pierced her with pins and fishhooks. He also raped and sodomized her. Nicole told police that she was chained inside the cab for 6 days. Her ordeal didn't end there. Inside his Houston apartment, the trucker allowed her to bathe, then chained her to the bed and raped her again. She watched helplessly as he approached her with a straight razor. He pressed the blade close to her scalp and began to slice off her hair. After 3 hours, he forced her back into the truck. This time, he failed to bind her. When they stopped at a brewery, he left her alone as he walked inside to sign for his new freight.
You know how many days that you were in the truck?
Nicole knew this might be her only chance.
Where did you...
She ran for it, still wearing a dog leash around her neck.
I needed to go to California.
Houston police stopped a trucker in the area whose rig fit Nicole's description.
Hey, Nick.
She said he was not the man who attacked her. A background check revealed no outstanding warrants or convictions, so police released the trucker. Nicole told the officers to stop searching. She was too frightened to testify against her attacker. She just wanted to go home to California. On February 5th, the same day that Nicole escaped, another young woman was on the highway thumbing for rides. Just 15 miles away in Pasadena, Texas, 14-year-old Regina K. Walters was running away with her new boyfriend. Her parents were divorced, and Regina usually stayed with her father in Houston. She'd been visiting her mother for a few days when she fled and began hitchhiking. Whether she was following the lead of her new teenage boyfriend or just testing her independence, a trucker soon stopped for the pretty young girl. Regina's mother, Carolyn Walters, was a single mom who worked long hours as a department store clerk. When she came home from work, she was surprised to find her daughter was not home.
Regina?
Her daughter did not answer.
Regina?
Carolyn found no notes and saw no other signs that her daughter had been back to the house. She checked the answering machine, but Regina had left no messages. Carolyn called her daughter's friends and Regina's father in Houston.
Hello, Chris.
No one had heard from the girl.
Is Regina there?
The distraught mother reported her daughter as a missing person to Pasadena, Texas police. She spoke with a detective from the juvenile section, providing the officer with Regina's description. Her 14-year-old daughter was about 5 feet tall, weighed 95 pounds, and had long, curly brown hair. The detective asked Carolyn what steps she had taken so far to find her. Carolyn had posted missing persons flyers, but no one had yet responded. The worried mother hadn't heard from her daughter since they argued 2 nights before. At 9:30 that night, Regina told her mother she was going to visit a friend.
I just think you ought to stay home tonight.
When Carolyn objected, the girl insisted she would be right back.
Regina, what?
Against her better judgment, Carolyn relented, trusting that Regina would call if she stayed out later. Though the young teen had a history of running away, she always returned on her own.
Her parents or where she is right
Her mother believed this time was different. Pasadena, Texas Police Detective Suzanne Jackson of the Juvenile Division was assigned the case. She understood Carolyn's concern.
Several days passed, and Regina would normally call her mom when she would leave home and let her mother know that she was okay and that she was just out. She would be back when she was ready to come home, and she had not done that.
You can just set those up right here.
Carolyn posted more flyers at the convenience store close to her house. She held out hope that her daughter was unharmed. Maybe she was simply staying with a friend. Along with Regina's photo and description, Carolyn offered a reward for information on her daughter's whereabouts. Five days after Regina's disappearance, Carolyn received a phone call. The caller had seen Regina talking to 2 young men on the evening she left her mother's house.
Okay.
The person only knew the men as Billy and Ricky, but she remembered that Billy had a girlfriend with the peculiar name of Urena. Carolyn immediately called police.
Speak to Detective Jackson, please.
The following day, a second caller gave Carolyn the address of an apartment where he had seen Regina at a party 2 days before. When police arrived, no one answered.
Okay.
The manager told them the apartment was rented to a man named Billy Wayne Gibbs. The next morning, the detective told her colleagues about the case. She mentioned she was looking for Gibbs in connection with Regina's disappearance. She was also looking for 2 others, a woman named Urena and a man named Ricky. She didn't know their last names. To her surprise, the officers did. Billy Wayne Gibbs had a girlfriend named Urena Sweet and a friend named Ricky Lee Jones. The 3 were wanted in connection with an auto theft. Units were dispatched to Gibbs' apartment to wait for his return. Officers patrolled the nearby road. After several hours of surveillance, they picked up 17-year-old Gibbs and his girlfriend Urena near his apartment. Police handcuffed the young couple and brought them to the station for questioning. The 3rd suspect, Ricky Lee Jones, was still at large. The arresting officer asked Gibbs if he had seen Regina or Ricky Lee Jones. Gibbs said he had spoken to them 4 days ago, but not since. He told police that Ricky and Regina were in love and planned to run away to Mexico, where Ricky had relatives. The detectives suspected that 18-year-old Jones had another reason for leaving town. If he were caught with Regina, he could be charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor.
Regina was 14, and they obviously were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. When they saw the flyers that the mother had left out with reward on her location, they decided it would be best to leave the area so they wouldn't be caught. And that's when they decided to leave the area, hitchhike to Mexico.
The detective learned that Ricky Lee Jones was already on probation for theft. Fleeing jurisdiction was a parole violation. She issued a warrant for his arrest. She also fed Regina's description into the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, a database listing both victims and criminals nationwide. If Regina were located by any police department in the country, Pasadena, Texas police would be notified. Until then, with no known address or vehicle, it would be difficult to find the pair. 15 miles away, Houston police interviewed Jerry Walters, Regina's divorced father. He told them he had received a disturbing call on his unlisted home number on the evening of March 17th. The conversation was brief, and Walters did not recognize the caller's voice. The man asked, "Are you Regina's father?" When Walters replied yes, the man told him he knew where to find Regina. He said she was in a loft of a barn, and that there had been some changes. He had cut the girl's hair. Regina's father asked if she was dead or alive. The caller hung up without answering. Detective Jackson asked Southwestern Bell to trace the call. The company told her it would take several days. Police would simply have to wait. Aside from the phone records, the trail of the missing 14-year-old and her boyfriend was stone cold. In March of 1990, Pasadena, Texas police detective Suzanne Jackson continued her search for 14-year-old Regina K. Walters. The girl hadn't been seen since early February, when she left a friend's house with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones. The detective's only lead was an anonymous phone call made to Regina's father on March 17th. The call had yet to be traced. On the same night Regina's father received his call in Houston, her mother in Pasadena, Texas, also got a call.
Hello?
She recorded the conversation as police had advised.
Yeah.
An unknown man told Carolyn to meet him at 6:30 the next morning at the local convenience store. He had something to tell her about Regina, and he wanted to say it in person. Without giving his name or description, he hung up. Carolyn called Detective Jackson, who told her it was risky to meet the man. When Carolyn insisted, Jackson said police would go with her for protection. From a distance, officers kept an eye on Carolyn as she waited at the convenience store for the unknown caller. She had no way of knowing if the man knew who she was, and no way to identify him. Her only hope was if he would approach her. She studied everyone who came in and out, and everyone who used the phone. Carolyn waited over 2 hours. The caller never came forward. 2 days later, Pasadena, Texas police received the phone records for both calls to Regina's parents. They learned that the call to Regina's father in Houston was made from a gas station in Ennis, Texas, 200 miles northwest of where she was last seen. The call to her mother's home in Pasadena, Texas, was made from a payphone only a few blocks away.
At that particular time, It was obvious that we were becoming very concerned about Regina's whereabouts with the phone calls and the information that we received. We were pretty sure that there was going to be foul play involved.
2 weeks later, Carolyn told Detective Jackson that the man who had called her before wanted to set up another meeting at the same convenience store. Police traced the call to a nearby payphone. The caller had already fled. On April 23rd, police found a partial skeleton of a small female near a riverbank in Pasadena, Texas. They determined the young girl's age and weight was close to Regina's. Detective Suzanne Jackson brought Regina's dental records to the medical examiner.
I went to the ME's office with my information. We did a comparison on some dental x-rays and found that this particular person was not Regina.
Months went by with no leads. Regina's parents feared the worst. On October 12th, 2 boys were playing near a dirt road in Manville, Texas, 26 miles south of Houston. Close to the road, they came across a wood pile. They found something they'd never forget. Human remains. They ran home to tell their parents, who called police. Officers arrived and secured the area. They could not identify the body at the site. It was too badly decomposed, and there was no wallet or identification nearby. All police could guess was that the victim was a child or young adult. They hoped an autopsy would tell them more. The Pasadena, Texas detective traveled to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office, bringing Regina's dental records.
So you almost have a match right
The
there.
ME compared those records to x-rays taken of the corpse.
But then you get everything you can obviously.
They did not match.
It was a little disappointing, although we were very relieved that it was not Regina. Her parents at this particular point were concerned that we were going to be recovering a body and we were not going to be locating Regina alive, and they were ready for some type of closure at this point.
As the search continued in Texas through the fall of 1990, a farmer prepared to burn down his old barn in Bond County, Illinois. He hadn't been inside in years. The farmer climbed up into the hayloft to make one last check of the place. He looked through the abandoned building, but found only items long since discarded. Nothing seemed especially unusual or out of place. Then, something caught his eye. He looked closer at the strewn hay and saw a skeleton that appeared to be human. The farmer immediately called police. In October of 1990, as Detective Jackson hunted in Texas for 14-year-old Regina K. Walters, a decayed body was found in the hayloft of an abandoned barn in Bond County, Illinois. Agent Mike Sheely of the Illinois State Police responded to the scene.
I had received a call from the local sheriff's office in Bond County, Illinois, and they had instructed me that they had found a body in a rural setting near the Interstate 70, which is a major interstate that travels through Bond County.
Crime scene technicians conducted a thorough search of the barn. No clothes were found on or near the body. There was no wallet or other ID. They did find a single white thread close to the bones that seemed too new to have been in the old barn for long. Police photographed the remains from various angles. They found baling wire that matched the wire wrapped around the corpse's neck. Some hair remained on the head. Because the skull was so small, police believed the victim was probably a child. The people of nearby Greenville had not seen a murder in 10 years. The anonymity of this crime was especially disturbing. Police had no way of knowing if the victim was from the area or just dumped there by someone passing through on nearby Interstate 70. At first, they weren't even sure of the corpse's age or sex. Forensic anthropologist Mark Johnsey was called in to conduct an examination. He made several discoveries that helped Illinois State Agent Mike Sheely begin to identify the victim.
Mark was able to determine that it was a young female between the ages of 14 to 16, her approximate weight, which was 90 to 110 pounds. There was indication that her hair had been cut. The distal ends had begun to grow again, but the forensics had told us that it was recent.
The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The killer had almost severed the victim's head by twisting baling wire around her neck 16 times.
That's what we found.
From the condition of the joints and vertebrae, Johnsey discerned that the girl was killed almost a year before. A forensic scientist analyzed the white fiber found close to the body. Maybe it would yield a clue to what the young girl or her murderer had been wearing. He determined the fiber was mostly cotton, but it didn't come from clothing. It likely came from a towel. Searching the National Crime Database, State Agent Mike Sheely listed the Illinois Jane Doe as a white female, 14 to 16 years of age, probably killed as early as September 1989.
We were alarmed to find that there was 950 matches with the age group and the category and the time frame, which made the task very difficult to begin the identification process.
He narrowed the field to about 100 by specifying the victim's time of death closer to the spring of 1990. The investigator then sent teletypes to law enforcement agencies working those cases. The detective investigating the disappearance of Regina Walters in Pasadena, Texas, received the teletype on October 16th. She believed the body's description fit Regina's and phoned the Bond County Sheriff's Office in Illinois. The receptionist told her they had gotten so many responses that the sheriff would have to call her back. Before she hung up, the detective remembered the mysterious phone call Regina's father had received. The caller had said the girl was in a barn.
When I asked her if the body was found in a barn, she immediately transferred me to the sheriff, in which I started talking to him right away. And it was immediately discovered that it was possibly Regina, and so we immediately jumped on that and started sending the teletypes back and forth.
The detective asked another question based on the March 17th phone call to Regina's father. Did the girl in the barn have shorn hair? The Illinois authorities confirmed that she did. The girl found in Illinois matched the caller's description of Regina.
We sent a copy of dental x-rays to Greenville, Illinois, to the sheriff's office, and those dental x-rays were matched with the body that was discovered there, and it was confirmed to be Regina's body.
One question remained. Where was Regina's boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones? Detectives called on the FBI for help. Special Agent Mark Young, a behavioral expert in the Houston field office, was assigned as case agent.
And I tried to go in and contact every person that had any involvement with Ricky or Regina. I wanted to see if there was anything that they mentioned that would have proven valuable to locating Ricky.
At his former high school, Pasadena, Texas detectives also continued to pursue Ricky Lee Jones.
That's right, you did. When you called, just a second, please.
A guidance counselor said that Jones had not been enrolled in school for the past year. She had little other information about him, though she did provide his last known address. It was the home of Jones's family. His sister Tammy was the only one there. She said that no one in the family had seen Ricky for over a year.
A year? You haven't seen him in a year?
They had written him off as a bad kid, believing he'd end up in prison. The detective asked if they had relatives in Mexico. Tammy said her mother had some in Matamoros, just south of the Texas border.
Have you seen her?
Jackson showed her a photo of Regina, but Tammy didn't recognize her.
Okay, that's the last time. Has he left?
Ricky was already listed as wanted because he had violated his probation. So we felt like maybe he was afraid to come home if he did know anything about Regina's disappearance and her death. We were in fear that he may not want to call and tell us what had happened or may be involved himself.
As Special Agent Mark Young pored over the details of the case, he developed a profile of Regina's killer. The agent determined that 18-year-old Ricky Lee Jones probably did not commit the crime.
If Ricky Lee Jones had murdered Regina, he would have done it in a fit of anger, and that would have been reflected in the crime scene, and you didn't see that. It was a very controlled, purposeful crime scene. You got the impression that this is an older person, a white male, a traveler, truck driver, traveling salesman, somebody that had a reason to be across the country.
The fact that the barn was close to an interstate supported Agent Young's theory. The crime scene told the agent more about the sadistic murderer. He had stripped off Regina's clothing, killed her slowly by strangulation, and most notably, had cut Regina's long hair.
Whoever did this crime was doing things beyond what was necessary to perpetrate the crime. Maybe a sexual predator or sexual sadist, a person that had other offenses also.
Investigators were alerted to another crime in the town of Marshall, Texas, 200 miles north of Houston. Partial skeletal remains of a young man were found, washed up on a creek bank. The skull had been perforated on the left side by a small caliber firearm. Though there was little evidence to positively identify the body, the victim's age and location led police to conclude it was probably Ricky Lee Jones.
I came to the conclusion that there were no other leads to cover in this case. For all intents and purposes, the case was closed in our division. We had nowhere else to go.
To investigators, it looked like the man who had killed Regina K. Walters and her boyfriend had gotten away with murder. As the hunt for a sadistic killer ground to a halt in Pasadena, Texas, 1,000 miles west in Arizona, authorities encountered a problem on their own highways. An Arizona highway patrolman was at the end of his shift when he came across a tractor-trailer parked on the side of an interstate on-ramp. The rig had to be moved. It was a hazard to passing motorists. He noticed the lights were on and the engine was still running. As he approached the driver's door, Officer Michael Miller recalled that a man suddenly burst out of the cab and immediately spread his arms against the truck.
And I asked him, I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Nothing, officer, we're doing just fine." He said, "There's no problem. I've got a gun in my back pocket." And he motioned to his back pocket and then put his hands up on the side of his truck. This was kind of an unusual situation. And I could still hear the woman screaming on the inside of the truck.
Miller cuffed Robert Ben Rhoads and escorted the trucker back to his car to question him further.
He said it was just fine. They were there together in a, I guess you would call it, consenting situation. And, but I didn't know if the screams coming from the woman were the fact that she was startled, she was surprised, but I was going to find out what the situation was.
With Rhoads' hands cuffed behind his back, Miller seatbelted him into the patrol car. The officer returned to the truck to check on the frantic woman. He found her handcuffed to the walls by her wrists and ankles. The patrolman assured her she was no longer in danger.
I told her, "Ma'am, you're going to need to remain here until I can get some help out here, because this is a criminal or a crime scene, and some detectives are going to have to look at this." I said, "Just remain calm. This man is not going to be back to bother you again. Just remain calm." I left the truck and moved back to my patrol car.
Miller returned just in time. Rhoads had maneuvered his cuffed hands in front of him and released his seatbelt. He was about to open the car door. The officer quickly recuffed him.
There is no actual routine stop out there in the road that no matter what you come across out there, you never know who you're dealing with. And it kind of sent a chill up my spine to know that if this man, as cool as he was, could have probably killed me and the girl at the same time and still been on the road.
Police from the town of Casa Grande arrived on the scene. They freed the woman and transported her and Rhoads to the police station for further questioning. Inside the truck, they found a gruesome array of torture tools. Chains that attached to rings welded to the back of the sleeper compartment, fishhooks, bloody towels, a horse bit, and a briefcase filled with the implements of a sexual sadist. They also found a camera in the briefcase, along with several hairs that did not belong to the woman found in the truck. Casa Grande Police Detective Rick Barnhart led the investigation.
Robert Rhoads had what I refer to as a rape kit in his truck. He had all kinds of paraphernalia. He had long sticks with clips on the end where he would draw and quarter his victims. He had whips. And just based on that, I knew Robert Rhoads was a predator.
Just north of Phoenix, the truck stop.
The woman found chained in Rhoads' truck was 27-year-old Kathleen Vine.
I've never had any problems before.
She told the detective she had been picked up about an hour earlier from the Rip Griffin's truck stop north of Phoenix.
He was trying to rape.
When she dozed off in the sleeper compartment, the trucker climbed back, assaulted her, and chained her to the walls. The man told her his name was Whips and Chains, and that he'd been doing this for 15 years. Police photographed her injuries, wrist burns from the handcuffs, and welts from the beatings. She tried to fight off her attacker, but her hands were chained. All she could do to defend herself was to bite him. She managed to injure his left shoulder enough to distract him from raping her. Kathleen agreed to press assault and kidnapping charges, but Detective Barnhart believed she might be problematic for the prosecution.
My interview with Kathleen was really sort of bizarre. She would talk about this reality, this terrible assault that she endured, and then periodically she would revert back to a story about her traveling across the country to see the president. She told me she wanted to give the president a microchip, and she talked about the underground prison where no one escapes from. And all this time my heart was sinking because I needed Kathleen to tell a very lucid story about the horrible incident that happened to her.
The detective asked trucker Robert Ben Rhoads for his version of events. Rhoads said Kathleen was crazy and described her as a lot lizard, the trucker's term for a woman who trades sex for rides. He claimed that she solicited him and that she liked it rough, though they never actually had sex. He refused to provide any details about what happened in the truck's sleeper compartment. He talked around the subject, never admitting to any crime.
Can you please remove your...
Police photographed Rhoads' wound. It looked like a bite mark on his left shoulder, just as Kathleen had described. Rhoads claimed he sustained the injury while loading his truck, but Detective Barnhart believed Kathleen's story.
She told me she tried to bite his throat, but he moved and she bit him on the left upper shoulder. And we've got a photo of her bite mark, and her story completely corroborated, what happened in that sleeper cab.
Local prosecutors arrested Robert Ben Rhoads and held him for aggravated assault, sexual assault, and unlawful imprisonment. But their only witness, Kathleen Vine, suffered from paranoid delusions. To keep him behind bars, they needed additional witnesses. Kathleen's claim that Rhoads had been kidnapping women for 15 years haunted Detective Barnhart. He entered Rhoads' name into the NCIC in case other agencies had reported similar crimes. As the detective pursued the case, it made headlines across the Southwest. A Houston police officer was among those who read about it. The trucker detained in Arizona sounded like the same man who was stopped outside of Houston earlier in the year. Police suspected Rhoads had held a woman captive in his truck for 6 days, raping and torturing her until she finally escaped. They were unable to press charges since the woman failed to identify him. Houston Police Sergeant Bomar described the case to Detective Barnhart.
I was contacted by Sergeant Bomar. His was the case where the young lady escaped. I was fairly positive that Robert Rhoads was at least a serial rapist. I had suspicions that he might be a murderer.
Since Rhoads had crossed state lines since his last crime, Detective Barnhart contacted the FBI to request assistance. He hoped that with the FBI's support, he could gather enough evidence of the trucker's serial sex crimes to build a case that would stick. Special Agent Bob Lee of the Houston FBI field office knew the place to start was in Rhoads' Houston apartment. He spoke to Rhoads' landlord. She had checked the apartment after the trucker's arrest and was horrified to find bloodied torture devices. Based on her statement, Agent Lee secured a warrant to search the premises.
We know that serial rapists often keep souvenirs from their victims, whether it be a piece of clothing or a piece of jewelry or whatever. When we went in, we found bondage paraphernalia, we found chains, we found handcuffs, we found a rack that someone could be tied to. We found a lot of women's jewelry.
Agents and Houston police also found bloody white towels, women's clothing, and stacks of photographs. The snapshots depicted some women with shorn hair in various states of undress, bound and bruised. Investigators believe that Rhoads shot the photos as souvenirs of his crimes to relive his victims' terror. Though agents now had evidence that Rhoads was likely a serial rapist, they were unable to identify any of his victims from the photos. With no additional witnesses, the case in Arizona was still weak. Prosecutors' only witness, Kathleen Vine, was questionable. The trial would be a contest of he said, she said, and a mentally disturbed woman might leave jurors unconvinced. By December 1990, the best Arizona prosecutors could do was to offer Rhoads a deal. 6 years, including time served and work release eligibility, if he pled guilty to the charges against Vine. His attorney accepted. In about a year, Rhoads could be out on parole, stalking new prey. By October 1991, a year after 14-year-old Regina K. Walters was found murdered in Illinois, her case remained unsolved. Special Agent Mark Young, an FBI profiler, predicted the murderer was probably a trucker or traveling salesman with prior sexual offenses. His signature behavior was to hack off his victim's hair. Agent Young spoke to area law enforcement agencies hoping they had open cases that might match the profile.
One day, Bob Lee, who was an agent in the FBI on the Violent Crime Squad, overheard me talking on the phone to a police officer. And he said, hey, I had a case I had worked a few months back where a truck driver kidnapped a young girl and her head hair was cut just like you're saying.
The victim's name was Nicole Tuttle. She had also been raped repeatedly and had escaped the day Regina Walters and Ricky Lee Jones were last seen alive, on Monday, February 5th, 1990. That same day, Houston police had stopped a trucker named Robert Ben Rhoads, who fit Nicole's description of her attacker. At the time, she told the officers it was the wrong man. Special Agent Bob Lee from the FBI's Houston field office recalled that Nicole later changed her story in the hospital where she was treated for her wounds.
Later that night, she told the detectives that Robert Ben Rhoads was in fact the individual that had kidnapped her. When asked if she wanted to press charges, she told the police officer that all she wanted to do was go home.
Lee also told Agent Young that Nicole was not the trucker's only victim. Rhoads was serving time in an Arizona prison for the assault of Kathleen Vine and was eligible for work release in just 3 months. The agent then described the search of the trucker's residence.
And he said, we found some photographs in his apartment, some of his own pictures, with somebody else with short hair who, it seems like she was at a barn.
The chilling photos portrayed a young girl at different locations, wearing a variety of seductive outfits. At the barn, she was in a black dress, shielding herself from Rhoads' camera.
When I saw those photos, I said, this is Regina Walters. In order to verify that, I went to the family and I got several of their pictures, and there are facial characteristics and markings that exactly duplicated the pictures Rhoads took.
The FBI began to build a kidnapping and murder case against Robert Ben Rhoads. They revisited the evidence from the search of Rhoads' apartment and found more photos of Regina. They also found several articles of women's clothing, including a black dress, which lab examiners confirmed was the dress Regina had worn in the photos. Illinois State Agent Mike Sheely was notified. He forwarded the evidence found in the Greenville barn to the FBI lab in Houston. Lab examiners discovered that the cotton fiber recovered in Illinois was consistent with the bloody towels found in Rhoads' Houston apartment, but the results were inconclusive since that type of towel was so common. Detective Jackson from Pasadena, Texas, met with agents Sheely, Young, and Lee at the Houston FBI field office to discuss what they needed for a solid indictment against Rhoads, not only for Regina's murder, but for crimes against his other nameless victims. With Rhoads nearing his release date, Illinois State Agent Mike Sheely knew they were racing against the clock.
He was eligible for parole, and that he was actually eligible to work outside the prison almost on a release system. And so we were under pressure to have the indictments and to get him arrested on our charges.
You have a seat here.
Agents interviewed Rhoads' former Houston employer, Mike Eggleton. The trucking firm owner was not surprised to see him. Eggleton had been questioned by authorities about Rhoads before. A few years back, local police suspected the trucker of assaulting a woman in the back of his rig, but no formal charges were ever filed. The truck Rhoads had driven had been sold, but Eggleton provided its vehicle identification number, as well as Rhoads' trucking logs and fuel receipts. While agents waited for a trace to come back on the truck's ID number, the team began to assemble a timeline of the trucker's travels. Agents found fuel receipts from a gas station in Ennis, Texas, dated March 17, 1990, the same place and date as the call made to Regina's father, Jerry Walters.
Oklahoma City.
Several of the local calls to Regina's mother, Carolyn, also coincided with Rhoads' time in Houston. One question about the calls remained. The killer could easily have gotten Carolyn's number from missing persons flyers posted around town. But how had he gotten Jerry Walters' unlisted home number? Agent Young found the answer in evidence stored in Arizona.
It was in that evidence that we located Regina Walters' little spiral notebook. And the front cover was all of her personal information, her mother's address and phone number, and her father's.
When Young flipped the notebook over, he found something even more disturbing. A message that he believed was written by Rhoads himself. A knife and gun were drawn above a phrase that appeared to have blood dripping off its letters. The phrase read, "Ricky's a dead man." Only a DNA test would confirm if the partial remains of the young man found in southeast Texas was Ricky Lee Jones. Unfortunately, investigators lacked a known source of Jones's DNA to perform a comparison.
And everywhere else.
Since Rhoads claimed to have been abducting and torturing his victims for the past 15 years, the team submitted their timeline to VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, an FBI database that lists thousands of solved and unsolved crimes nationwide. Despite the limited information and gaps in the timeline, Detective Jackson was not surprised when the system returned over 50 possible matches with open homicide and missing persons cases.
His trips from Houston to Baltimore to LA and back in a matter of 4 to 5 days at a time could just give you an idea of how many people he has access to and remote locations that he could abuse these people and dispose of them.
A week later, agents tracked down Rhoads' truck in Houston. 2 years had passed since Rhoads had driven the rig. The cab had since been steam cleaned, repainted, and used by other drivers. But evidence of his crimes somehow survived. Investigators recovered a single strand of head hair that was consistent with Regina's. Miraculously, they also found a small fingerprint on the vinyl upholstery in the sleeper compartment that matched her prints. That proved she had been in the truck, but it did not prove when or whether she'd been there against her will. By January of 1992, almost 2 years after Regina had disappeared, investigators determined the evidence was not decisive enough to prove interstate kidnapping. They dropped the federal case. With Rhoads' parole hearing just a week away, investigators convinced the Bond County prosecutor to press charges in Illinois for capital murder. They knew the evidence was circumstantial, but they pressed on.
I feared that he could escape, and I also believe that due to the overcrowding in the prison systems and those sort of things, that he could be released.
On February 6th, investigators traveled to the Arizona State Prison in Florence to serve the warrant to Rhoads. Their plan was to confront Rhoads with photos of Regina, hoping to prompt a confession. An incriminating statement would bolster their case. The suspected serial killer was unfazed, even smug.
We spent approximately an hour with him, but Rhoads was unwilling to speak with us and denied any involvement in the death, and was very firm in his denials. And at that point, we knew that we were going to have to prove our case.
Agents believed Rhoads knew they were fishing for a confession because their evidence was weak. They suspected this arrogant man was betting he could beat the charges. Maybe he believed that they didn't care enough about his victims to earn a conviction.
A lot of serial offenders, whether they're killers or other sexual predators, will pick victims that they consider the forgotten people because they're banking on that element that law enforcement and society doesn't really care about hitchhikers or less wealthy people, less established folks. He preyed on that type of person in the hopes that he wouldn't get the attention that did happen.
Almost 2 years after the death of Regina K. Walters and the kidnapping and sexual assault of at least 2 other women, Robert Ben Rhoads was extradited from Arizona to stand trial in Illinois. He and his attorney managed to delay the trial date for 6 months. On September 11th, the overconfident trucker lost his nerve. In a Bond County, Illinois courthouse, his attorney pled down the capital murder charge that carried a possible death sentence. He accepted an offer of first-degree murder with a penalty of life. Rhoads was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even as he serves his time in the maximum security prison in Chester, Illinois, investigators have not abandoned the case. They continue to gather evidence, committed to proving that Regina K. Walters was not Rhoads' only murder victim.
There is one other picture of a female as yet unidentified that got into the truck with him. We're somewhat concerned whether that may be another victim. Anybody that gets into the comfort zone of the truck of a serial killer may potentially be another murder victim.
Investigators continue to work on identifying the unknown women from Rhoads' past in hopes of bringing the small comfort of closure to their grieving families. A teenage immigrant came to the United States to realize her dream of becoming a doctor. But a tragic twist of fate intervened when she found herself an innocent victim of the drug trade. Kidnapped and held captive, she survived for days against all odds. Authorities arrested her captors, but they refused to reveal her whereabouts. The FBI and local police raced against time, determined to save the teenager's life.
When a young woman was grabbed from her Texas home, the police raced to find her abductors. On the face of it, the kidnapping seemed like the random act of desperate men. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Before the FBI could find her, they first had to find a motive. Their investigation revealed a complex story of betrayal and revenge. At its center stood an innocent 16-year-old who found herself in the clutches of killers.
September 24th, 1994, Arlington, Texas. It was a Saturday night, and 16-year-old Lisa Renee was home studying. She wanted to make the most of her first semester in an American high school. She hoped to someday return to the Virgin Islands as a surgeon.
Who is it?
At 8 p.m., her concentration was suddenly shattered. Somehow, she knew not to answer the door. Instead, she called her sister Pearl.
What do you want?
Pearl told Lisa to call 911. She promised to come right home.
Arlington 911, what are you reporting? Who do they say that they're looking for?
Lisa said men were trying to break into her house, men who claimed to be FBI agents.
You have the wrong house. I'm sorry. Oh, they're the FBI. Oh, they're the FBI. They said that. What's going on?
The dispatcher heard the phone drop.
What's going on?
Then there was silence. Lisa never came back on the line. As Arlington, Texas police responded to the 911 call, Lisa disappeared into the night. Police had no way of knowing they were about to pass her on the street, or that a 16-year-old girl was now in mortal danger. Police were on the scene with Lisa's sister Pearl when Detective John Stanton arrived. As a veteran of the Arlington police force, he would lead the investigation.
From the initial 911 call, it sounded like a very serious kidnapping. It sounded to the 911 call takers that there was some foul play and some actual violence involved.
The detective needed to know everything, and quickly. The early hours of a kidnapping case are crucial. Pearl told the officers all she knew. She was at work when her sister Lisa called to say some men were trying to break into the apartment. She told Lisa to call 911, then hurried home. But she was too late. She found the sliding glass door smashed and Lisa gone.
For a 16-year-old to be physically dragged from a residence in Arlington is just, it's really kind of unspeakable.
Okay, now whose room is this?
Pearl told the detectives that her brothers, Neil and Stanfield, were also staying with her. They had been evicted from their own apartment for allegedly selling drugs. Pearl explained that her family was from the U.S. Virgin Islands. She and her brothers had come to America first. Lisa had joined them in time to start school. She was a straight-A student. Investigators processed the apartment, hoping to find a clue as to the abductors' identities. They found no prints far into the apartment. Perhaps the abductors were known to the family. The detective asked to talk to Pearl's brothers, but they were on their way back from a Houston music festival. The detective told Pearl to get them on the cell phone. They were 50 miles from the apartment when Detective Stanton reached them.
I understand what you're saying. When I spoke to the brothers, I spoke with Stanfield initially. Stanfield told me that they don't know of anyone who would have wanted to abduct their sister. They owed no one money, that this was not about any sort of drug business. They weren't involved in anything involving drugs.
All right.
As much as Pearl Renee tried to help, the detective believed her brothers had the answers he was looking for. But without their help, he would have to identify Lisa's captors the hard way. As precious minutes slipped by, forensic technicians combed the apartment for additional clues. They collected glass from the broken sliding door and hair and fiber samples.
Also got books.
They dusted for fingerprints, only to conclude that the kidnappers had worn gloves. Even this small detail worried detectives. It suggested Lisa Renee was in the hands of experienced criminals. If Detective Stanton ever hoped to find Lisa alive, he knew he needed all the help he could get.
You have to use the resources available to you, and that includes additional manpower, the use of the FBI. You have to use everything that you have as a resource.
Special agents from the FBI's Fort Worth resident agency joined detectives at the scene. Special Agent Kenneth Bersano was concerned that the kidnappers had identified themselves as FBI agents.
As it turned out, there was no FBI agent there on the scene or any other joint investigation ongoing in that neighborhood.
Neighbors reported seeing 4 young African-American men hanging around the apartment complex prior to the abduction. They were wearing camouflage clothing and driving a champagne-colored Cadillac.
The atmosphere at the crime scene was tense. Lisa Renee's sister was very distraught that she wasn't there for her sister, and also residents in the complex were disturbed that a young lady could be abducted from an apartment complex so readily.
The fact that Lisa Renee was a minor and that her abductors had impersonated federal agents gave the FBI jurisdiction over the case. They would work in conjunction with local law enforcement.
Homicide Stanton.
Detective Stanton worked through the night and into the morning.
Yeah, what's going on?
In the early hours of September 25th, he received a call from Lisa's brothers. They had found the champagne-colored Cadillac in nearby Irving, the same one residents had described at the complex.
It was an unusual tip. For the brothers to have just barely gotten into Arlington, to have had them drive mysteriously to a residence in Irving, Texas, which is some distance from Arlington, and in that same bit of circumstance, find a Cadillac fitting that general description, we thought was very curious.
They reported that the Cadillac was parked in front of a residence. If Lisa's brothers knew something more about their sister's abduction, they weren't telling police. Detective Stanton and Special Agent Bersano rushed to the residence in Irving. Irving police were already there. The sooner they found out where Lisa was being held, the better their chance of finding her alive. As Lisa's brothers had said, the Cadillac was parked out front.
I got a cold hood.
We touched the vehicle to see if the vehicle had been moved or had been in operation previously from the heat on the hood. We also looked inside the vehicle with our flashlights to see if there were any items that may have been left by the victim.
A woman answered the door.
We explained why we were there, that we were from the Arlington Police Department, from the FBI. We'd like to talk to her about the abduction of a young 16-year-old girl. We asked if we may just look around her home to see if the young lady that was abducted was in there.
The woman said she and her husband owned the Cadillac, but he wasn't home since he worked the night shift. She said she hadn't seen anyone who matched the description of the suspects. But she let investigators take a quick look around. They began in a child's room where her son was asleep. Nothing seemed suspicious. In another room, they awakened a woman sleeping in a double bed.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning.
It appeared she was alone.
Talk to Sandra. She told us we would look around. We're looking for somebody. Just sit tight.
In the hallway, investigators noticed stairs to an attic. One of the Irving officers climbed up and looked around.
There's a light up here.
He checked amidst the boxes and other items, but saw no one there.
I don't see anything up here.
We didn't have a real just cause to do an intensive search of the residence. We searched for, obviously, any sign that someone had been kidnapped, in places where someone could secrete a human body, just to be on the safe side.
Investigators left, still suspicious. But without a warrant, they were unable to do a more thorough search. Investigators turned their attention back to Lisa's brothers, Neil and Stanfield.
We felt that it was drug-related, and we told Neil and Stanfield that we're not interested in their current legal problems, but that we feel like Lisa's life may be at stake, and that we need to have all the information that they can provide us to help get their sister back.
The day after the kidnapping, investigators again interviewed Neil and Stanfield. Despite their pending drug charges, Lisa's brothers finally came clean. They described a bogus drug deal that they'd taken part in a few days before.
What's up, man?
The brothers said that they had met with 2 men, but claimed they only knew the one named Steve.
9 pounds, right? Yeah.
Steve and his partner had given them $5,000 to score 9 pounds of marijuana.
How long will it take?
Neil and Stanfield promised they would return in an hour with the drugs, but they never did.
Right?
They now admitted they had never intended to deliver the marijuana. They just needed the money for attorney's fees because of their pending drug charges. Lisa's brothers said they didn't know how to contact Steve, but they knew someone who did. And that was all the brothers would say. The man who knew Steve was an inmate serving an 8-year sentence at the Tarrant County Jail. He revealed that Steve's full name was Stephen Beckley, a 19-year-old who worked detailing cars at a dealership in Irving, Texas.
West Wing Auto Shop, where's that at?
Investigators ran a computer check on Beckley. He had no outstanding warrants and no criminal history. As investigators continued to work the case, Lisa's sister, Pearl, did all she could to help. She hung up missing persons flyers and contacted local media, hoping someone might have seen Lisa. But the chance of finding her sister alive grew dimmer with each passing day. On September 24th, 1994, 16-year-old Lisa Renee was kidnapped from her Arlington, Texas apartment.
Who you want to see? Who are you? I'm the FBI. Oh, they're the FBI. Open the door. No, we talk. They're the FBI. They say they're the FBI, ma'am. No! Ma'am? What's going on? Ma'am?
Just over 2 days had passed since Lisa's desperate call for help. Local police and the FBI were no closer to finding the missing girl. With time running out, the Arlington Police Department asked the public for help. Detective Stanton recalls the response was tremendous.
It was truly something that brought out the public and the public's fears about being abducted out of your own residence. It's sort of something that you're not expecting in a community like Arlington. It's not something that's ordinary. This doesn't happen here, I would say, ever in a town like ours.
On September 27th, the Arlington police detective received an unexpected visitor. He was the owner of the Irving, Texas home that police had searched in connection with the champagne-colored Cadillac. He was at work during the search, but had since heard the news of Lisa's disappearance and believed he had information that might be helpful. He said that the day before the kidnapping, he threw a barbecue since his wife's brothers were staying with him for a few days. The oldest brother, Orlando Hall, was involved with drugs. His younger brother, Demetrius Hall, shared the same interest. Their friend, Stephen Beckley, joined them.
When the husband told us that the Hall brothers were dressed in camouflage clothing, it made him know that after having heard the news stories, his brothers-in-law could very well be connected to the kidnapping case.
Something else had sparked the man's suspicions. One of his neighbors said she saw several young men drive up to the house in his Cadillac. At that time, he and his wife were out for dinner using a different car. But the Cadillac's keys were kept in the hall, so it was possible his wife's brothers had borrowed it. The man said he'd never trusted the Hall brothers.
Come here, you.
Both had served time in Arkansas on drug charges.
Come here, son. Come here. Come here.
And by visiting their sister in Irving, Texas, they were in violation of their parole.
No, you ain't like. Put it out. Whatever's right.
The man sensed they were up to something new, but didn't know what. He added that the Hall brothers were no longer staying at his house. On the night of the kidnapping, only Orlando had slept in the house, but he flew back to Arkansas early the next morning, planning to stay with friends in the town of El Dorado. The detective suspected Orlando had probably joined the others there. He contacted the El Dorado, Arkansas police. Investigators discovered that 19-year-old Demetrius Hall was on parole for possession of cocaine with intent to distribute. His older brother, Orlando Hall, was on parole for the same offense. His record also included arrests for aggravated assault and carrying a weapon.
When I spoke to the people in El Dorado, they were aware of the Hall family. In fact, they were providing to me information about the Hall brothers before I could even give them the information about the Hall brothers. They were well known to law enforcement in the community.
Later that day, investigators obtained a warrant to more thoroughly search the Irving, Texas home where the Hall brothers had been staying. They scoured the house for hair, fibers, blood, fingerprints, and anything else that might be connected to the crime. FBI Special Agent Garrett Floyd remembers their most significant discovery.
In the children's room, we found a souvenir miniature baseball bat. When you pick up an item and you can see glass embedded in it, and you know that the sliding pane window was glass, then you make a decision on the spot, and you believe that evidence is a part of the crime scene.
Lab tests would determine whether his hunch was correct. In a storage container found in a bedroom closet, investigators discovered a green knit shirt with insulation fibers on it. They bagged it for further analysis. They also took samples of insulation fibers from the attic. Lab tests would later reveal that they matched the fibers on the shirt. A pair of camouflage pants was also found in the attic. Forensic technicians processed the champagne-colored Cadillac at the police impound lot. They found no fingerprints relevant to the case. They did discover a few small glass fragments inside the car, possibly from Lisa's sliding glass door. They sent the fragments to the lab for analysis. As they waited for the results, agents obtained arrest warrants for the Hall brothers and their friend Stephen Beckley, since they already had enough to establish probable cause. But they still hadn't found Lisa Renee. Agent Floyd continued to work around the clock, knowing that with each hour, they were less likely to find her alive.
We were very motivated in solving this case, in as much that we knew that time was critical. All of our efforts were focused on the recovery of the victim.
Investigators hoped they could pick up Lisa's trail, a trail that ended with broken glass. Technicians compared glass fragments from the car and those embedded in the baseball bat to shards collected from Lisa's home. At the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C., Supervisory Special Agent and Forensic Examiner Bruce Hall attempted to confirm that all the glass had come from the same sliding glass door. Technicians examined the glass embedded in the baseball bat. They tested the composition of the glass. It was consistent with the glass collected at Lisa's apartment. To confirm their results, they also tested its refractive index, the degree to which light bends as it passes through the sample.
After characterizing the glass recovered from the crime scene and characterizing the glass recovered from the baseball bat, I found that the glass on the baseball bat had the same refractive index and same composition as the glass at the crime scene. That led me to the conclusion that the glass on the baseball bat had originated from the crime scene.
The glass found in the Cadillac did not match. It was determined to have come from a window previously broken on the car. At the request of the FBI and Arlington, Texas police, El Dorado, Arkansas detectives tracked down the fugitives. They found 19-year-old Demetrius Hall at his father's house in El Dorado. He surrendered peacefully and was taken to the El Dorado jail. But he refused to say anything about Lisa's whereabouts. The search of the house revealed nothing. What investigators still didn't know was where Lisa was and whether she was dead or alive. 4.5 days after 16-year-old Lisa Renee was kidnapped from her sister's apartment in Arlington, Texas, investigators had tracked two abductors to El Dorado, Arkansas. One of the three suspects, Demetrius Hall, was in custody. Investigators continued to search for his older brother, Orlando, and a third man named Stephen Beckley. That afternoon, police found Stephen Beckley at a friend's house. The officers didn't even have to knock. Beckley came out and gave himself up. FBI agents and detectives from Arlington flew to El Dorado to interview the suspects. Stephen Beckley was initially uncooperative. He refused to say where Lisa Renee was or whether she was still alive.
I'm losing my patience with you right now.
Special Agent Garrett Floyd refused to give up.
Mr. Beckley advised that he did not know a whole lot of information concerning what was going on. After about an hour of talking to him, he looked at me and we developed somewhat of a relationship and we started to talk.
Beckley said that he and his friends had called in a fourth man named Bruce Webster to help them exact their revenge on Lisa Renee's brothers. Webster was a convicted felon and had a violent reputation as a hitman. Their plan was to douse Lisa Renee's brothers in gasoline and ignite it if they didn't turn over the drugs or the money as they had promised. When the men arrived at Lisa Renee's apartment, her brothers were not home. Unwilling to leave empty-handed, they kidnapped her instead. Beckley said that he and the other three took Lisa to the house in Irving, Texas, where Demetrius and Orlando were staying. They transferred the teenage girl from the Cadillac to Beckley's Ford Escort.
Get off the car.
Stephen Beckley, Bruce Webster, and 19-year-old Demetrius Hall drove her to Arkansas. Orlando Hall stayed behind and hid in his sister's attic. Detective Stanton was frustrated. Police had been within a few feet of Orlando Hall and missed him.
It wasn't until later that we learned, after we had taken some people into custody, that Orlando had been indeed hiding in the attic insulation while we were downstairs talking to the lady of the house.
Beckley said that during the 4-hour drive to Arkansas, he and the other two had taken turns raping Lisa Renee. When they arrived in Arkansas that night, Webster booked a motel room in Pine Bluff. Lisa was kept bound and gagged in the bathroom.
I'm trying to find him.
Agents pushed Beckley to tell them if the girl was still alive and where she was. Every minute counted if they were to save her life. But Beckley wouldn't say. He claimed he was afraid to talk as long as Bruce Webster was on the loose.
In his mind, he thought, believed, knew that Bruce Webster would kill him or anyone else if they ever divulged the information of what had occurred to Lisa Renee. That's the fear that Bruce Webster had instilled in the individuals as part of his kidnapping.
If I say a word...
Beckley did tell investigators where to look for Webster. The ex-convict might still be at the motel in Pine Bluff where they had held Lisa Renee 4 days ago. Investigators headed to the motel to confront a man Beckley had described as a violent hitman. Pine Bluff was 90 miles from El Dorado. Agents spoke with the manager to confirm Beckley's story. They hoped they would find Webster there, as well as Lisa Renee.
Upon interviewing the innkeeper, we were able to determine that Bruce Webster had registered at that inn, and that during the time he was registering, a young lady attempted to get out of the car, and that Bruce turned to the other occupants in the car and says, "Put the bitch back in the car." Bruce Webster and his companions then drove to the back of the property and went into the room.
The manager also remembered seeing 2 other black males in the car, but she couldn't make out their faces.
Nobody said anything last
She
night.
showed investigators the registration log for September 25th. Webster had been in room 513. The room was rented and cleaned several times after the men checked out. Chances of finding any useful evidence were slim. An FBI emergency response team was called in. The agent and detective continued to interview Beckley. They asked him for details of what went on in the room, hoping he would break down and tell them where Lisa was now.
Once we got Mr. Beckley to this Pine Bluff motel, The urgency was there in that we thought that she was still alive because Mr. Beckley assured us the last time he saw her, she was alive and she was at this inn.
Okay. Beckley told police that the men had raped Lisa repeatedly in the bathroom. Otherwise, they had kept her hooded with a paper bag over her head. During their second night at the motel, the kidnappers were nearly discovered. A security guard knocked at the door.
The innkeeper asked that their on-residence security guard who lived there check the room to see if everything was all right. The security guard did check the room and did not see Lisa Renee within the room. Stephen Beckley advised that had he seen her, that they were going to kill the security guard.
Beckley and the others were afraid that the guard might return. The motel was no longer a safe place to hide. As the kidnapper told his story, forensic technicians worked to confirm that Lisa had in fact been in the room. But after hours of painstaking work, they still had no evidence that Lisa had been there or that she was still alive. 6 days after 16-year-old Lisa Renee was kidnapped from her Arlington, Texas apartment, the FBI was no closer to finding her or two remaining suspects. Although investigators had found no evidence to indicate that Lisa had been in a Pine Bluff motel room, confessed kidnapper Stephen Beckley assured them she had. Forensic technician Joel Stevenson of the Arlington, Texas Police Department was determined to find something that would corroborate Beckley's story.
We went in knowing that possibly sexual assaults had occurred in that motel room, multiple sexual assaults. We went into the motel room looking for body fluids that may tie the suspects to the motel room or Lisa to the motel room.
If Lisa and her kidnappers had left behind any evidence, it appeared to have been destroyed by the motel's housekeepers. The technicians didn't give up. They continued their meticulous search for hairs, fibers, and fingerprints. Finally, their persistence paid off.
It wasn't until we got into the bathroom and the wall behind the toilet is where we located the palm prints and fingerprints that were ultimately identified as belonging to Lisa Renee. So the palm print itself, placing Lisa with them in that same motel room, was very important. It was a very critical piece of putting her with them.
Investigators now had evidence that Lisa was alive 4 days earlier, the day Beckley and the others had checked in. As agents drove the kidnapper 90 miles back to the El Dorado jail, they pressed Beckley for more details. He admitted that after Orlando Hall had joined them in Pine Bluff, they decided to move Lisa to another motel nearby in order to avoid a second visit by the security guard. After a couple of days in that motel, the men grew increasingly concerned about getting caught. They came up with a plan to dispose of the girl. Demetrius Hall stayed behind to wipe the room clean, while the other three loaded her into Webster's car and headed for a rural area. Beckley told investigators that Bruce Webster and Orlando Hall had dug a grave in a nature preserve near the motel. They took Lisa there to kill her. But in the dark, overgrown park, the three men couldn't find the burial site. After an hour, they took her back to the motel. The next morning, they searched for the gravesite again. While forensic technicians scoured the second motel room for clues, investigators pressured Beckley to tell them what happened next. Special Agent Garrett Floyd recalls that Beckley refused, still afraid that Webster might seek retribution.
We were pressed for time because the clock was still ticking. We were hoping against hope that she was still alive. And so with this in mind, agents as well as police officers who had not slept in 2 or 3 days were up searching, looking, hoping that she was still alive.
Then, investigators got the call they'd been hoping for. The FBI emergency response team, working at the second motel, had spotted Bruce Webster pull up in his car. The suspected kidnapper had returned to the motel with a young woman, but she was not Lisa Renee. A brief interview revealed she was not connected to the crime in any way.
He had driven up into the parking lot. Our officers and the FBI agents confronted him. He identified himself as Bruce Webster, gave date of birth information. He was carrying a small baggie of what appeared to be marijuana in his pocket. He was asked if we could search his vehicle. He allowed the officers to search his vehicle that he'd driven up in.
Inside the vehicle, agents found two handguns. They charged Webster with possession of the guns and the marijuana and took him to the Garland County Jail in Hot Springs, Arkansas. The car was processed for other evidence. They found no trace of the missing girl.
And when they radioed us and told us he was in custody, we, myself, and Detective Ford went back and interviewed Bruce Webster. He stated that he didn't know anything. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was simply coming back to his motel room.
As Agent Floyd continued to pressure Webster for answers, the last of the fugitives, Orlando Hall, turned himself in.
Orlando Hall had apparently seen the news that these arrests had been made, found out, of course, that his brother had been taken into custody. He surrendered to the Pine Bluff Police Department.
With all four suspects now in custody, agents hoped that one of them would reveal where investigators could find Lisa Renee. The interview with Bruce Webster, the man who had been hired to do the killing, continued into the night, but he said little. Agent Floyd believed Webster had the answers they were looking for.
Basically, the only information Mr. Webster provided was his name, the fact that he hadn't done anything, and the fact that he wanted to go to sleep. To him, it was nothing. She was nothing.
Agents' hope of finding Lisa alive was fading. They needed to get one of the suspects to talk, and they needed to do it fast. Six days after a young woman was abducted from her Arlington, Texas apartment, investigators pressed her suspected kidnappers for information. Until now, alleged hitman Bruce Webster had stonewalled investigators. But Special Agent Garrett Floyd's persistence eventually paid off. Webster finally admitted that Lisa was dead.
It felt like a tremendous sledgehammer falling on you. We had tracked this young lady from Arlington, Texas to Pine Bluff, Arkansas, over 200 miles, with the one hope of finding her alive. And we did not. It was as if all of the wind and all of the energy had gone out of us.
Webster picked up the story where his accomplice Stephen Beckley left off. When they returned to the park with Lisa, they located the grave they had dug the day before. Detective John Stanton's fears had been realized.
The reality of it set in at that point that we were not going to find her alive. We were not going to be able to save her. We were going to be too late.
Stand by the car. Watch
Webster said that only two of his accomplices, Orlando Hall and Stephen Beckley, took Lisa back to the park. The fourth kidnapper, Demetrius Hall, had stayed behind to clean the motel room and wipe away fingerprints. The suspected hitman claimed he wasn't actually with the others when they killed the girl. Webster said he returned to the car to act as the lookout. From the car, the grave was too far away to have seen the murder. Now that Webster was safely in custody, the agents decided to see if Beckley would corroborate his story. Agent Floyd felt that Beckley knew far more than he had said.
And he looked at me and he said, "You know I didn't tell you everything. You know I've lied." And I said, "Yes, I know you did not tell me everything. You didn't lie, but you didn't tell me everything." And he said, "You're right." So then Stephen Beckley started crying. And Stephen Beckley told me she was dead, that she was buried in these woods, and that we needed to go get her. And I said, "We will go get her. Let's get your story on paper, and we will go and find her."
Crazy, man. He's a hitman.
Beckley said that despite Bruce Webster's story, the hitman had indeed been involved in the killing.
He told us a story that the grave was 6 foot deep, and that when she went to the grave, when she, Bruce Webster, Orlando Hall, and he, Stephen Beckley, arrived at the grave, that she saw the grave, and that she started to run in the effort to get away. And that they struck at her with a shovel and placed a mark in this tree. That he, Beckley, became concerned and was afraid and ran back up to the street to check to see if the way was clear, as he was instructed to by Bruce Webster. By the time he came back, they were burying her.
What you asked for?
Beckley told investigators that the men then met Demetrius back at the motel, showered, and left. They gave their dirty clothes to Webster, who burned them in the park, along with Lisa's blood-stained outfit. Webster stayed in Pine Bluff with Orlando Hall, while the other two returned to El Dorado. The agent re-interviewed Webster, hoping Beckley's confession would give him some leverage. The agent told him that Beckley had placed him at the murder scene and named the park where the body was buried.
He stated that he didn't know anything about anything. The last thing that I told him was, "Everyone else has told me what has occurred. Why won't you?" And he said, "They're family, aren't they?" And I said, "Yep, the family has turned on you." He said, "Open that book. Let me tell you what happened."
The hitman now confessed that he was, in fact, at the murder scene. He admitted that he had dug the grave, and he offered to show it to the agent.
So in the middle of the night, we drove back to Pine Bluff and told him I need as many flashlights and officers and agents available, that we were going to find her tonight.
Webster showed investigators the area of the park where the body was buried. They searched for evidence to corroborate the suspect's stories. By morning, they found the gravesite. They began to process the area and exhume the body. The site was as the hitman had described it, right down to a damaged tree near the grave.
And we removed a section of that tree because it was evidence that the shovel that they were hitting her with had actually missed on one of their swings and hit the tree. So we used that tree as a part of the evidence.
Unearthing the body was a time-consuming and heartbreaking process. Besides digging, investigators sifted through leaves and dirt, searching for anything that might help tie the suspects to the crime. Joel Stevenson of the Arlington, Texas Police recalls the moment when their hard work finally paid off.
We made contact with Lisa's body approximately 2 feet down from the surface, the outer surface of the dirt, and then started uncovering her and really excavating around the body from that point on down to the 4 feet level. This lasted for about 5.5 hours. It took us to fully extract her from the gravesite.
When they reached the dead woman's body, it was an emotional moment for investigators who wanted so desperately to save Lisa Renee.
During the time we're exhuming her body, one of the agents on the evidence response team accidentally scrapes her knee. The agent breaks down, and I break down, because we know now that she's dead. This week that we have spent trying to locate her has resulted in the recovery of her, but not the recovery of her in that she was not alive.
The coroner removed Lisa's body to the Arkansas State Lab in Little Rock, where an autopsy was performed. She had ligature marks on her arms, defensive wounds on her hands, bruises over much of her body, and deep lacerations to the back of her head. But the cause of death was determined to be suffocation, coupled with blunt force trauma to the head. The coroner believed Lisa's attackers knocked her unconscious with a shovel and then buried her alive.
When you find out that you were that close to possibly saving this kidnapped victim from her demise, as it turned out, it hurts in that you wish you could kind of go back in time and do something different than you did. But under the conditions that we had and the information we had to work with, we felt like we did as good as we could. Unfortunately, it wasn't good enough to save Lisa.
The 4 kidnappers were tried soon after her body was found. Demetrius Hall became a witness for the state and accepted a plea bargain of 25 years. Stephen Beckley did the same and got 30 years. Orlando Hall received the death penalty for interstate kidnapping resulting in death. A few months later, Bruce Webster received the same sentence. Both were sent to death row at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. The trials were little consolation to Lisa's sister Pearl, who could barely absorb the fact that the bright teenager would never realize her dream of becoming a surgeon.
I thought I'd feel better, but I really don't. Because, I mean, it's not going to bring her back. The only thing that's going to make it better is Lisa was here today, and she's not coming back.
For Arlington Police Detective John Stanton, Lisa Renee's murder had disturbing implications.
It just solidified the fact that things can happen to people who are completely and totally unrelated to criminal activities. No one is exempt from the possibility that, for no real reason of their own, they get put in a position where their life is in jeopardy. And Lisa Renee is a prime example of someone that, in the years that I've been doing this, she is actually probably the most innocent victim that I've ever worked a case on. And it's something that we'd all need to remember, that even if you're an innocent victim, you can still be a victim.
For Special Agent Garrett Floyd and investigators alike, the case was personal.
I have a daughter who's approximately the same age as Lisa Renee. And to believe that someone could take a child, a young lady, and do the things that they did to her and then kill her without any respect for life takes that father image in me to a different level. Because we love our children, and we know that we will have to take care and keep them out of harm's way. And on a Saturday night, if my daughter's doing homework and I happen to run to the store, they could break in my house and take my daughter and do the same thing.